4, 3, 2. All right. Hello and welcome everyone to another Chat and Learn here with Power to Fly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into this next hour with you all. We've got folks calling from all over today. We've got Ontario, we've got London, the Virgin Islands, Buenos Aires, Charleston, North Carolina, Detroit, San Francisco, Texas, Buenos Aires again. I'm calling from Argentina and Patagonia. Our guest speakers are calling from Boston and Chicago. So we're pretty spread out already for folks who are joining already. I know we might get some more folks joining a little later. But before we get started, I just want to go over some quick housekeeping rules so that we get comfortable and confident so that we can all participate and listen to our reflections, our ideas, our own tips and tricks that might work. I know we've got two phenomenal guest speakers here ready to drop knowledge, but I also know that you all who are listening might have some tips and tricks of your own to share. So I invite you all to use the chat box. You can drop anything you'd like in the chat box, any questions, any reflections, any tips and tricks of your own as well. I'm also going to invite you all to drop your preferred ways of networking in the chat box, because I really like to use this opportunity to build meaningful connections here. So be looking out for that invitation in just a few moments. But again, we'd love for you to participate. So even if you're rewatching this, feel free to drop comments on the YouTube Dropbox there, or you can leave comments wherever you're watching this on Power to Fly as well. All right, so if you would like to hop off mute and voice your question or reflection, you can do that by raising your emoji hand. That will let me know that you'd like permission to hop off mute. Otherwise, you can drop in the chat box, the public or private chat box. Let me know that you'd like to hop off mute, and I will give you permission to do so. Now, if you do hop off mute, you will be featured in our live recording as this is being recorded. And this is just a good reminder for those of you who signed up for this chat, be looking out for a rewatch email, because video, as well as any links to resources that our guest speakers might bring up throughout the hour so that you can access them easily there. So be looking out for that rewatch email. And again, I invite you all to participate in the chat box. If you have any sensitive information and you prefer to be kept anonymous, feel free to just find me in the chat box and write to me privately. So you can find me under Mariella Marie. Just write to me privately there, and I will raise your question or your reflection to our guest speakers and keep you anonymous. All right, the last thing I'll say is we'd love for you to follow Power to Fly on socials and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep up with all the great chats we've got in store for you this year. Now, if this is your first time joining a chat where I'm moderating, I'll just take a couple seconds to introduce myself before I pass the mic to our guest speakers. So I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. I currently live in Patagonia here in Argentina. And I love speaking about the importance of emotional intelligence at home, at work, and at play. I feel like we've got a lot of room to grow there. And so I invite you all to participate in exploring the realms of emotional intelligence by adding any comments to the chat box. I might bring some of my reflections to that point if we have time. So otherwise, I invite you all to support the project that I'm working on that is called the Positive Force Team. You can go to thepositiveforceteam.org. You can sign up for our newsletter, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect there. Again, be looking out for the invitation to drop your LinkedIn's or your preferred ways of connecting. That can be your website, any projects you're excited to share as well. I'm going to invite all of our live callers to participate in the chat box in just a few minutes. So go ahead and grab those links and be ready for that invite. All right, so without further ado, we've got two phenomenal guest speakers here ready to drop a lot of knowledge. I know we had a lot of people excited to hear this conversation. You all have submitted some awesome questions previous to this chat. So I'm just going to pass the mic to our guest speakers so they can introduce themselves here. Maureen, let us know a little bit about yourself, how you came to learn about Power to Fly, and what you're excited to share with us today.
Yeah, thanks so much. Great to meet you all. And was introduced to Power to Fly through some of our colleagues at Bain, who thought that the messages that and the conversations that you're leading would be really well aligned with some of the messages that Darcy and I have tried to bring forward in our book, Winning on Purpose. But just a little bit of background. I'm a partner at Bain. I've been here almost 20 years, and one of the things I've been passionate about throughout that time is just the power of people in business. And so, how do you think about both the customer, the leader, employee, and how do you bring these different people together in a way that we just deliver tremendous outcomes across everything that a business should be delivering, which is amazing experiences for employees and customers and amazing returns for shareholders. And Darcy and I can talk a little bit about the message in the book, but the message is those things aren't in conflict and in fact are completely complementary. So really excited to share that message today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I know that you're going to probably share more about your story as we roll through the questions. Feel free to do so, because I know that was a really just, skimming, just getting to know you a little bit more introduction. So feel free to add anything else you'd like as you respond to these questions. And until then, Darcy, please let us know a little bit about yourself, also what you're excited to share today as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm delighted to be here. I think one of the things that Maureen and I have really enjoyed about having off of this book is it just gives you such a platform to talk to so many different people who have a different lens on the world in the broadest sense, but in the business world as well. So it's super fun to be here. I'm in my 22nd year at Bain, which is insane and unimaginable in some ways. In other ways, I'm like, wow, it's been like 4 lifetimes. Have worked all over the world with many different clients. I spend most of my time now in financial services, and I lead the customer practice for Bain, which is everything from brand and marketing, Salesforce effectiveness, to Net Promoter System loyalty and employee engagement, and now winning on purpose. And I love what you said around, just so much is about the people. In Myers-Briggs, if you're familiar with that framework, I'm a big F, I'm a feeler. I've always wanted to bring this notion of a reciprocal relationship and love into business. And I feel like we now finally have a platform to talk about that, the core relationship that a consumer has with a company, with an employee has with a company, with employees have with consumers, and just love is everywhere, as we like to say. So I'm super excited to share that with this team and figure out how we can let love rule today and in all of our lives.
Beautiful. I'm already excited just to hear both of you reflect on these awesome questions. But before we get into the questions, please set up the stage for us talking about some of the principal themes for today's conversation. So I know that everyone, signed up for this chat because we shared about these 3 points, but I'd love for you to just walk us through and set the stage before we go into the questions.
Great. I think I can start, and Darcy, please feel free to chime in. A couple of things we want to talk about are, how do you really understand and identify when employees feel valued and respected? And we'll get into this a little bit, but a lot of traditional HR has really focused on satisfaction, right? And are employees satisfied, and measures that through annual surveys and, perks, like we've got free food and ping pong tables. But really at its core, and we'll talk about some of the work we've done, you want to go beyond just satisfied to engaged and, in love, as Darcy said, with being an employee of that company. And you do that by making people feel valued and respected. We can talk about that. The positive challenges a customer first mindset generates in teams. We believe firmly that there is the best way to actually drive that kind of value and respect among employees is to put customers first, because it actually frees employees up to focus on the people that power your business. And by that focus on people, it frees them from feeling like they're having to make trade-offs. They have one clear objective, and that actually creates a much better experience for all. And then the role that leadership, I think we're happy to spend a lot of time talking about this. And I think we can all reflect on our own career, on the leaders who really inspired and made us better and made us feel more engaged and valued, and how that is absolutely the critical thing here. And you'll see when we wrote the book, everything starts with the leadership and purpose, because if the leaders don't set the right tone, none of the other things that you need to do to create, a loving company, if you will, that loves its employees, loves its customers, is possible.
And the only thing I'd add to what Maureen said is, it's obvious we're all living in an increasingly digital world, accelerated by the pandemic, but it is just true. Yet we just still fundamentally believe in the humanity of business and the role that humans play. Even if it's designing those digital experiences, those people are still touching people through the technology or through the physical products they're creating. And so a lot of what Maureen is describing is, how do you continue to reinforce the intimacy between the customers you serve and your team, so that there's just abundant clarity as to the role that the company plays. And in our mind, the ultimate purpose, just like we said in the book, is the unbeatable strategy of loving your customers. And if you're really clear on that, it can clear up a lot of the noise in teams, in leaders, and in choices every company makes.
Beautiful. Thank you both so much for setting up the stage. I love the human-led approach, and I totally agree 1,000%. That the love needs to be there. I love that you all are bringing up the word intimacy, and just that changes the game. We get more of that emotional intelligence framework as well. A lot of people call them soft skills, and I'm like voting for it to be called power skills more and more, and essential skills, because when we don't have that empathy, when we don't have that self-awareness, we're not able to have that intimate connection with ourselves or with the people we work with. I know that you all probably talk a lot about this in your book. So just to not go on a tangent here, because I have a lot to say about that, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the questions that folks have submitted previous to this conversation. And again, folks, if you hear your question come up and you're here live with us, please just let us know that you're here. We just want to make sure that we get your question covered. If you have any questions that come up in the moment that you weren't able to submit previous, feel free to drop those in the chat box. Our main point here is we want this to be an open dialogue. So the more that you participate, the more beneficial it'll be for everyone. All right, so let's start with this first question here. And I'm just going to tee this up for whoever wants to pick it up and run with it here. So how can we best measure employee satisfaction? Are there any methods or metrics you suggest over others?
Yeah, I'm happy to get out of the gate here on this one. And there's so much in that question. It's a really good question, although it seems very narrow. What's the metric? It sets up just all the things that we think about so well. So first is, just that word satisfaction. And this is something we felt for like decades now about customers. Satisfaction is insufficient. And I think the same is true for employees. If you want your team to really give their all, to bring all their creativity and their energy to your business, you got to shoot for something more. And so that is just a macro theme. Number two is measurement is important, right? There's the old adage, what you measure, you can manage. At the same time, we find that asking for feedback is most powerful when the people who give it as a team have time to reflect on it and use it and themselves get better. And so maybe I'll spend just a minute talking about how Maureen and I's company, Bain Company, which is fundamentally a human business, does this, and we'll see where that takes us, and Maureen will jump in too. So the way we think about employee engagement and measuring that is at a couple of different levels. Number one, and I would say most importantly, it's at the team level. So the teams themselves, that and however that's constructed in your company, have the opportunity on a very routine basis. It could be every 2 weeks, it could be every month. It depends a little bit on how your teams are constructed. Answer a survey, very short and sharp, couple of questions. Often it's the Net Promoter Score question for employees. Would you recommend this company to a friend or a family member as a place to work? And then often we dig that down to one more. Would you recommend working with this team or in this department or whatever is a little bit more closer to home? What would make working with this team or for this company even better? So giving an opportunity to explore that. Often in that very short survey, we give an opportunity for the team to call out their colleagues with a thank you or a shout out. So what has someone on your team done to make your life better in this period? And it's such a nice way for colleagues to recognize each other and also learn what seems to be working with the team well. And then the last question we often use is, what is a way that we could actually serve our clients better or our customers better? Again, bringing the whole team concept back to the purpose of the team, which is serving the customers. And then we have someone on the team who reads those results, shares it back with the team, and then there's a discussion. What do we like? What do we not like? What should we change? And it goes from the very tactical, can we not start meetings before 8 a.m., to the very strategic. We've got a big issue with this client. How do we move forward? Or our products are broken in this way. What can we do differently? Not everything the team will discuss, the team can control. So another big important piece is, how does the team then escalate what they're seeing to people who can actually control that? But the team is where the learning, the action happens. That being said, it's important as a company to know how your global set of employees feel about the company and what is working and not working. So we have annual employee surveys. This is very common in very large companies, but even in small companies, that is more comprehensive, is a full population survey to say, How is it going? Always has the questions like I described, but often many more. And I think what's most important in the survey is making sure that everyone feels they have an opportunity to express their voice and they are heard. So the feedback loop on the back end of, we've taken this big survey, we've learned some stuff, here's what we're going to do, here's what we can't do, because it's not within the realm of what's possible for our company, is a really important concept. We call that closing the loop, going back to employees talking about what happens and what they can do differently. So those are two bookends, the team and the company, and making sure that you've got those. Now, they don't always tie. And one big thing some companies try to do, they try to say, well, we're getting all these good scores down here, but we're getting all these crappy scores up here, or vice versa. That's because these are two different lived experiences and lenses on the employee value proposition, but it's important to get both. What would you add, Maureen?
The only thing I would add, and I think you touched on this, is this only works when there's a culture of trust. And so that's where the leadership becomes so important, because they have to set the tone that the feedback is not just used, but the feedback is used in the right way. And I've actually worked with clients where they have, cultures of what they call like blaming and shaming, where, a bad score would mean that a leader would sort of be, in some way, publicly acknowledged for those bad scores. And the key to a system that works is that it is seen first and foremost as a learning system, not a measurement system. And employees feel like they have the space and the trust that they will give honest, open, and direct feedback, and that leaders understand it is there to help them be better, and that it is not, not used in any way that people don't trust it. Because once you don't have that trust, that whole system kind of falls apart.
Wow, I love all of these reflections, and just thank you so much for just highlighting the importance of trust and how we can get there. So I actually have a follow-up question. Because I love that you all are, the perspective is it's a learning system, not necessarily a measurement system, even though you are measuring. Is it best to keep these surveys anonymous, or do you keep it transparent for transparency's sake and all the beautiful things that can happen with transparency? I would love to hear your response there.
Yeah, it's usually, the annual survey usually are anonymous. At least at Bain, that's how we do it. Most of my clients do it that way. Oftentimes these team-based surveys, they're anonymous, but they're small enough groups that the trust is really important, because, it's small enough groups that in some clients I go to, like, well, we could never do that because there just aren't enough people and it would be clear who said that. But that's where that culture of trust comes in, that, yeah, you could probably figure out who said that, but it's important and we need to know that. And we need to have open and honest dialogues with each other about that feedback, or we're not going to actually be able to improve it. So I'd say there is some anonymity, but in a culture of trust, you can do this at levels that you normally wouldn't be able to because people are comfortable with it.
Awesome. Thank you for that. All right, let's move on to the next question here. How can you convince higher ups about the fantastic value a fully motivated and engaged workforce can bring? Our business is great, but the company culture is stiflingly dictatorial.
Stiflingly dictatorial. Oh my goodness, that's such a descriptor. But I think drawing clearly the connection between employee engagement and inspiration to customer loyalty and all of the things that go along with that, buy more, stay longer, tell their friends, to growth, is the connection you have to make. And so one thing that Maureen said as we got started here is, in our mind, customer happiness, employee happiness, and shareholder happiness, profitability and growth are absolutely in concert. They are not in conflict. And so being able to draw that line quite clearly, as empirically and data-driven as you can, is super important to connecting that. And I do think right now in the zeitgeist, and given the Great Resignation, there's a lot of focus on talent and talent retention and getting the most out of people and supporting them in every way. And so I do think, to anyone who's having this little challenge right now, I think there's no better time than banging your fist on the table and bringing the data to your team and saying, this is why this is important. But equally, I think it's important to say, well, what would it look like to have an inspired employee? What are the most important things to the population of people you're trying to retain and inspire? And being clear about the root causes of any dissatisfaction. Too often people revert to, we need to pay everyone more. And again, clearly in this time and place and a living wage, there's a massive opportunity there. But what we often recognize is that once you get to a fairness and competitive level, it's about everything else. And so being really clear as you're going to your leadership as to what you think it is required to inspire your team, to keep them happy and motivated, I would go with that. It's that combination of why and now what.
Beautiful. Maureen, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just say it's a hard problem, but the creativity of employees is what has powered some of the great, success stories. And so how do you get leaders to understand that? I don't know if anyone, this will feel like a tangent, but it isn't. I don't think. If anyone saw the movie Cruella, it struck me. I'll just quickly say this because I thought it was so interesting. She took a job at the best department store in London. She wanted to be a designer, and she was cleaning the floor, and she kept bringing her designs to the head of the design, department. And he kept squashing them and saying, go back to your job, go back to your job, go back to your job. And then sure enough, she starts her own thing and becomes way bigger than the store ever was. And so I just want to show this clip to to the dictatorial executive that you've referenced, because the reality is most of so much creativity and growth opportunity exists within your existing employee base. How do you actually channel that and come up with the next big thing with your own people? And that's that mindset shift that has to happen. And I don't know, I have thought about just showing that movie in some of my executive sessions because it captured it so clearly.
So if one of those dictatorial leaders is listening right now, what's the first thing they should ask themselves? I know that you both are throwing out, some really, really great questions throughout these responses, but right now they end this conversation or they stop rewatching this. What should they do right now? What kind of reflection should they do to just shift that mindset?
Yeah. Darcy, you want us to start?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, just reflecting on who are the real heroes in the business. And this is where you have to erase all of the hierarchy out of your head. And this is another concept that's just getting thrown around a ton, right? The notion of hero, who's the hero? But I think in the context of supply chain disruptions and keeping employees and all this, it is the front line. And so I think the question to be asked is just who really are the heroes in our business, and how do we empower them? And what are we doing that is making their job hard? Because so many policies, procedures, rules that companies put in place really encumber the front line and teams from doing what's right by the customer. And there's a cool company, TD Bank, up in Canada, that had this kill a stupid rule. Literally, it's considered a good thing to identify these are things we've always said we should be true, but actually are really getting in our way. So killing the stupid rule is like a badge of honor at TD Bank. And so as a leader in a company, how do you make sure you're giving as much room to maneuver to your employees as possible and really supporting them, the heroes?
I love that. Thank you for diving into that. I know that was just a follow-up question because I know that we've got some folks like that listening now, or maybe, some direct lines there so they can just pass that big question to them. That's a great response. Maureen, would you like to comment on that as well?
Yeah, I think it is about those individuals, and it's about this, I call it the crisis of disconnection that we face, which is we have become so, obviously because of COVID, we've become so digital. We, at the same time, that transition was already happening in business. And it is so easy to think that we can use data and machines to solve all of our problems. And it is just the spirit of human creativity that's the core of this. And it's often the frontline creativity, as Darcy referenced. That's where the magic happens. And the more that we can, and Darcy also started with this humanity plus digital. It's all about the human and digital connection that's going to lead this next, this next generation of innovation. You talk about, the metaverse is getting thrown around everywhere, right? But at its core, the metaverse is really about seamlessly blending physical and digital. So shouldn't it be about, head and heart and human machine in a way that we can do things better than we ever have before? Is how I like to think about it.
Awesome. So I hope that some of those old school, I'm going to call it old school, because at this point, if you're leading like that, you know, you need to keep up with the times. As you all are saying, times are changing. You know, we're being asked to change things up as well with the way that we lead, and especially, you know, combining. I love the word that you used earlier. I think you said it's a concert, and that just is, it just brings like a nice harmony, you know, instead of dissonance and separation. So, you know, bringing that sense of leadership so that digital can be in harmony with the way that we are as humans. So thank you both for that. All right, let's move on to this next question here. Can this leadership style be used across all levels of employees in an organization? Do you see a higher risk of inadvertent compromise of secure company data if this is encouraged across all employees, particularly freshers? So this is the full question. If you have any questions regarding this question, I can just probe our live audience to see if they're here with us here live.
Yeah, I mean, if someone wants to put any more context around that, that would be great.
Yeah, so if you're here live with us and you submitted that question, feel free to write to me privately or write in the chat box so that we can just make sure that we're understanding the question correctly. It seems like there are a lot of parts at play here in this question. I'll before we have that person join, I don't know if they're here or not live with us, but sounds like fear is a leader in this question here. So there's some fear of, you know, sharing. I don't know, sharing different ways of collaborating based on your status, essentially. If you're an entry-level employee, or, you know, I think they call them freshers here in this question. So yeah, maybe how to get over fear and how to maybe join more collaborative effort in this leadership style.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think I understand a little bit of the arc here. And what I would say is a lot of the way that Darcy and I think about leadership was actually innovated with some large financial services companies where there is tremendous risk in, you know, in terms of customer data, things like that. And what we've talked about with them is freedom within a framework, which I know sounds, but there are instances and there are companies where there are some really important risk implications that you have to take into account. And so being really clear on what are some of those boundaries, but then outside of those most acute boundaries, giving people lots of freedom to do the right thing. And the other kind of term that I've used to some of my FS clients is leading by letting go. You know, and this was a big, Darcy knows this client quite well, a big contact center where there used to be scripts for everything, and it was down to the last, you know, word of what you said on each call. And they found, and you may be able to add some color, Darcy, they found when they took away those scripts and just gave people some guidelines, and certainly some, you know, you cannot say these things because this breaks the law or this breaks privacy. So that, not to say it was just completely open, they found that customer NPS went up, which is satisfaction, or, you know, a different way of measuring satisfaction. They found that average handle time, which is oftentimes a very big metric in contact centers, went down. And so there are lots of ways I think you can keep that, you know, security, but also give people lots more flexibility and freedom. I don't know, Darcy, if you'd add to that. I know you're close to that story.
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to the trust. A lot of it, right? Trusting in your employees to do the right thing, having trust in the company that they have your back, right, is so inherent in this. And I love the question around, you know, the freshers, because so many companies I know are dealing with such a lower tenured workforce. As there's been so much churn in the market, we're all reading about that. New people are coming to companies, and there's this I think reluctance of some executives to say, well, how much freedom am I going to give people when they're brand new and they don't know that much? And we want to protect them from making mistakes. But at the same time, we want them to bring that creativity and that energy. And so I think there's a trade-off or a fine line to be walking there, because some people may not yet have the confidence to have that freedom and they want to be told. I'll refer back to the financial services company I mentioned, TD Bank. They have another interesting rule, which is it's 1 to say yes, 2 to say no. And so the frontline employee or the whomever can say yes to a customer if the answer needs to be no, it takes two people to do that. So again, it kind of switches this notion of needing approval to the approval I need is actually saying no. And so how can you get some of those notions embedded in your company, which is again rooted back in the customer, but also in the trust of the employee when they're ready to bring the action. And again, not all low tenured employees are ready for that. It depends a little bit on what you're asking them to do, but putting the trust in your employees, you almost never go wrong.
Yeah, and I think we've got great evidence of that through COVID. So I worked with a large US bank moving their entire contact center to work from home right in the height of the pandemic. And at the time, there was so much concern around, privacy issues. People are going to have financial data sitting on their computers in the middle of their living rooms. I keep looking. You have not seen, and someone might correct me, I have not seen one article in the press about one thing that has happened with all of those individuals and all of these financial services firms moving that data home. Now, it's not to say a lot of these folks won't bring it back for some other reasons, but people are inherently good. And I think we just need to, there's a small, I always tell this to, I have young girls, I always tell this to them, there's like a very, very, very tiny part of the world that's not good at heart. It's so small. The bulk of people are really, really good. And if you give them the trust and the faith, I think that they will more than surpass expectations of what they can accomplish.
Yes, you're getting some emoji love there. So it looks like we shared that sentiment with you. And I mean, it's just better to be optimistic than not, especially when we're all trying to change things up. We're all trying to be in flow with the new change, so we can stay flexible, so we can communicate better, so that we can be better leaders, essentially. So thank you both for that. Now, some of you have already noticed I've opened up the opportunity for you all to start networking in the chat box. As our guest speakers keep saying, times are changing. It's better to, bring that human essence to all of these changes. So why not connect with some people who are interested in the same topic? So go ahead and drop your preferred ways of connecting in the chat box, your LinkedIn's, your websites, your other social media handles. I've seen some people drop their email addresses. So feel free to go ahead and do that and maybe reach out to a couple of folks and start to connect here as things are changing, as leadership styles are changing. I think that we can, form a community, whether it be here in these chat and learns or wherever we take this conversation out of, to just ask questions, go deeper, and support each other. All right, so with that said, let's move on to the next question here. Can these tips be used to change a toxic culture in the workplace? Or is the customer focus less effective for internal issues? And I would love to actually just also use this as an opportunity for you all to just unpack a little more about what your book is sharing as well, because I think that maybe you all have answered that question in your book.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll get us started. This is the fifth book as a company that we've written on the topic of customer loyalty. And it has moved from, oh, by the way, loyalty matters. Literally, we wrote a book, Loyalty Rules. And then about how to measure loyalty and how to use it as a tool, the ultimate question 2.0. This is the book that really is getting into the soul of a company, the core culture, the purpose, the intent of the company, this notion of winning on purpose. And purpose has taken on a lot of different connotations in this stakeholder capitalism environment. But our assertion in the book and everything we pin the book onto is that the sole purpose of a company is to serve its customers. And in a complex world of having multiple different stakeholders to go to, if you actually start with and focus on the customer, then you do right by your employee, you do right by the communities and this lovely earth that we all live on, because customers will always tell you the truth. And they'll always have your back if you treat them with loving care. And so that's the core principle of the book. And the stories in the book range from talking about specific companies who are amazing at this, they were born this way, if you will, to companies who've had to gone through a transition from having a toxic culture or losing their way, even if they started out that way and they need to get back to it. The other core concept in the book, actually, I'll let Maureen talk about it more specifically, is just this notion that you can't have happy customers and employees and happy shareholders. Because we just feel like we've just got to debunk that myth, because everyone will say serving customers and keeping employees happy is expensive. that may be true, but it also pays off. So I'll leave that for Maureen here. And then the last thing is, I think in this time period where we have so many hyper growth companies, new companies, new disruptors that are coming on board, we really want to distinguish the difference between unsustainable growth, bought growth, and earned growth. And the way you earn growth is by having products that are truly remarkable, that are different than your competitors, and you treat customers and your employees well, because then they stay longer, they buy more, and they tell their friends. And so we're trying to move the conversation from growth for growth's sake to really what is living your life right, which is earning growth. And what does that look like? How do you measure it, and what do you do about it? Let me turn it over to Maureen.
Yeah, Darcy knows I'd love to say there is no conflict between great results for customers, employees, and amazing shareholder returns. And so we actually took the companies from the Ultimate Question 2.0, the book that was written 10 years ago now, and the companies that we identified as NPS leaders at the time, Net Promoter System, so meaning they were the customer loyalty leaders in their industries. And we looked at their total shareholder return over this 10-year period, and they outperformed the market almost 3-to-1. And we looked at this as conservatively as possible. And so, how do you use that in terms of turning around a toxic culture? Well, trying to start that dialogue around the fact that, yes, maybe some of these short-term decisions are yielding financial results right now. But if we care about long-term growth, there is only one proven way to do that. And that takes real time and attention to your employees, who then can give that same time and attention to your customers. And that creates that flywheel of, unbeatable flywheel, frankly. And we've seen that. And it's interesting, the Glassdoor rankings just came out. And many of you are probably familiar with this. It's the best companies to work for. Bain, we feel very lucky to work at Bain, where we've been in the Glassdoor top 5. I think we've been in the top 5 the last however many years, number 1 5 times. But what was also interesting, and we're now going through and doing the actual correlations, as we stared at the list, the top companies to work for are all people we'd identified as also many companies we'd identified as these customer loyalty leaders too. So I think these things really go hand in hand. And the more you can get leaders to embrace that philosophy, the more I think that will permeate the culture.
Awesome. I love that. I love that. Congratulations also. We've got folks singing your praises in the chat box. So great. Beautiful perspectives. Thank you for sharing. All right, so let's move on to this next question here. How can we find and maintain a balance of doing what's best for both the employee and the organization? And as Darcy mentioned, then into the community and into the globe. I love that you are just like showing that trickle effect that it can have. So how would you all respond to this question?
Yeah, go ahead, Darcy.
No, feel free. You start.
I think I'll start, and Darcy, I'm sure will chime in. I think the employee and customer, I hope you kind of heard that we believe those two are really hand in hand. And so you just have to, it does start with leadership. Like, you need leaders that embrace that philosophy. In terms of extending beyond, we're doing some really interesting work right now that is showing that more and more consumers are actually more loyal to companies that have a great impact on society and the world. And so what I get really excited about is, because I think the current emphasis on world and society is an amazing one, but the thing that will keep it sustained is if customers and employees demand that the companies they work for and do business with adhere to these principles. And so I think over time, right now, I think we're in a world where there's been enough press and attention, and it is, I hate to say this because it is not a theme that should be, a fad in business. It's a theme that needs to become embedded in business, but it has the risk of becoming a fad until it is fully embraced by the people that actually talk with their wallets. And so the companies that are able to really prove that they are different on this dimension, get customers understanding that, I think are the ones that are going to really win over time. And I think it's customers and employees that will ultimately drive that movement.
I see you nodding. Darcy, do you want to chime in?
No, I just couldn't agree more. I just couldn't agree more. I'm happy to go to the next one, Mariella.
Great. All right, let's move on to the next one then. So my department head already struggles with the idea that negative customer feedback is just as important to heed as positive. As a manager, How can I champion this method to advance our customer client service without buy-in from my own supervisor?
Yeah, well, it sounds like the person who answered this question is already on board that negative feedback is powerful. All feedback is powerful, particularly when you're trying to learn and grow, right? And so, I think one of the things that we coach frontline leaders to do when they're in a huddle and they're talking to a team about the collective feedback is kind of, it sounds, I don't know, trite, but you start with the positive. And then you talk about one or two themes in the negative, perhaps with the proof point of some customer feedback. And then you end again on a positive. And it's like this feedback sandwich, right? It's got to have the good stuff on the sides to make the middle something that people can hear. And then to take the feedback, not as a reflection on an individual, but actually as a reflection of what can we do differently? Because not all customers are right, first of all. Not all customers will give you the best feedback, but what can you do about that? What did they infer? What did they perceive? What could have been even better? Or even how does the team react to that kind of feedback? How do you create resilience in your team for when even the customer is wrong? And believe me, I do think customers can be wrong, but you learn from how to deal with those folks to turn them into someone who's more positive about your company. And so I think demonstrating how negative feedback can be used productively to help your employees and to help the company is the path to getting others who may be challenged by it or afraid of it. Back to the fear point, and a lot of supervisors in particular feel like everything that happens on their team is a reflection of them. And so how do you move it from, it's not a reflection on the supervisor, but it's actually just the way the team gets better, and really changing the dialogue from feedback on an individual to learning for the team.
I love that. I love the feedback sandwich reference. I feel like and it's not trite. I think it's like a universal, just something that is universal that will help us get along and try to resolve conflict in a different way, and not just start being downers, so to start with something positive, inject it with what's happening, where there's space to grow and the opportunities, and then and leaving everyone on a high note, or just at least on a supported note. So I really appreciate that. And it's not trite at all. I think we need to practice more of that, actually. Yeah. And speaking of resiliency, I'd love to just shift into this next question here. If employees are burnt out and feeling resentful of customers, what are some ways to start rebuilding that positive relationship?
That's a great question. And I think feedback can be really powerful here. So I'll give you an example. Again, when we were in the midst of the pandemic, I actually had a lot of my clients reaching out and saying, should I turn off my customer feedback right now? Because it's just, my frontline employees have so much they're dealing with. This seems like one more thing. And so what we said to them is, well, don't turn it off. Maybe not share it, see what it says. And what it turned out was that at that moment, customers were saying amazing things about the employees. And so we said, get it to them as quickly as you can. And it became a hugely powerful thing for the employees to see the impact they were having at a very difficult time. And so underlying what I'm saying is, leaders have control over what they share when. And we, at its core, when we talk about our system, we do talk about transparency and sharing the feedback and all of that. But there are times when your employees are dealing with challenges that are really hard. And maybe that is a time to focus more on the positive and figure out the right way and time and space to handle the negative. And it's not because people can't handle the negative, they can, but there are just times when sometimes everyone needs a really good pat on the back. And as leaders, I think you got to recognize that as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I would add to that, we wrote a blog post, and I just put the LinkedIn newsletter linked in the chat a couple of months ago, because you know what? There's a time when not all customers are being very nice. And sometimes customers are being downright cruel and mean. And so I do think it's also the responsibility of the supervisor, much as Maureen said, at times to have their employees back in a real way and figure out when customers are actually being unreasonable and crossing the line. I think there's been plenty of examples in the news and otherwise and you probably witnessed them, of customers crossing the line based on expectations or whatever. And so I think it's important to dismiss this whole notion that the customer is always right, because sometimes your employees are more important than customers in certain times in certain ways. I think there's a way to swing all the way to the wrong pendulum, which is that, my employees are always right, but I think, we shouldn't be all the way here either. The pendulum is somewhere in that space.
I love the visual of the pendulum, and this is a great segue into the next question here. What can I do to intrinsically motivate my employees about this shift, especially when the budget is plummeting due to decrease in clients?
And I'm assuming this shift is this shift to a customer and employee mindset and thinking through the purpose. And look, every company I've ever worked with has cycles where they're killing it, cycles where they're not. And so I think one thing as supervisors, as leaders in companies, we have to always do is keep that long-term purpose and that destination in mind, and make sure employees can see that bigger picture. And so even if in this moment it feels tough, because for as many companies that have benefited from the last 2 years, many companies have really struggled, and there are whole industries that have really struggled. You have to paint a picture. We say, a picture of the beach. Like, where are we headed? What are we trying to do? Not just as a company, but where's that person trying to head, or what are they trying to do in their career? And how do you help them span out a bit and see the bigger picture and the reason and the purpose for being and the role they play in the organization, so they can kind of release a little bit, sweating all the small stuff, because every company is going to go through its cycles and have tough moments. But this is another way that reinforcing customer testimonials and customer feedback can be really helpful too. It's a good reminder as to why we do business. I had one of my clients go lead a car seat manufacturer, a baby and child car seat manufacturer, and they too had their ups and downs in terms of doing well as a company, and other times when their sales weren't as good as their competitors. But they had a town hall every month where they'd all come together, and they would literally read the stories of the children's lives they saved. And it's just that good gut punch of like, there's a reason we're here, and there's a reason we're being, and we're playing the roles we play. And we've got to always remember that. Now, not every company saves babies, granted, but every company has a purpose to enrich their customers' lives. And so if you can always bring it back to that, it helps you weather the tougher times.
Yeah, it's a great point, Darcy. And I think that and some of the research you've done, which I love, which talks about what really motivates employees. And what I love about it is it's actually the same from the front line to senior leaders. And it is like, once you've kind of, and it mirrors like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like once you've created a safe, like if you don't have a safe work environment, then nothing's going to motivate you, right? Like but once you've solved for that, it is about meaning and purpose and connection. And I believe most companies can find a mission and a purpose that's inspiring. Like I sit on a nonprofit board with a leader of like one of our favorite discount retail kind of surprise chains, where, growing up, my mother was a huge fan, and it was like, it brought joy to her to go to this store and find that special thing. And I shared that with him, and he said, sometimes it's hard for me because I wonder, how to motivate people. But what you're telling me is we bring joy. And I said, you do bring joy. And so rally around the joy you bring. And I think most companies should ask themselves, if they really think about how do they enrich customers' lives, there's a nugget there of some role that they play. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a point of being. And getting people to focus on that as their purpose is incredibly powerful, and give everyone, again, except for that really small population I talked about, they get out of bed in the morning and they want to have a positive impact on the world. They do. And so how do you help them see that the day-to-day job, where it's easy to lose focus on that they play a role in that?
Oh, you're giving me so much hope, because it's so easy to get lost in the sauce. Like, oh, what is happening to humanity? Why are people like not caring? So I love that both of you have this like optimistic point of view, and that, yes, we intrinsically want, I think you said everyone wants safe work environments. And clearly a lot of work we're doing with Power to Fly is making sure that voices are being heard, and that we make more space at the table and all that, so that we have that sense of psychological safety happening in the workplace, of course, physical safety as well, and just support so that someone can grow and not feel that they are, anyone's slave of service. So I really appreciate the perspective there.
Yeah, and I think I think that's what you said is so important. If that base layer of security and safety, whether it's physical, emotional, is not there, none of what we say is possible. And so I think that it's important that rests on a foundation, assuming those sort of key things are in place. And if those are not, it is very hard to do all the other things we said. So I think that what we said can help aid some of that, but there's just some basics that are just non-negotiable.
Absolutely. Thank you for calling that out. I appreciate that. All right, so we've got about 8 minutes left. I told you all that time would fly. I wrote in the chat box, if anyone wants to use these last couple moments to hop off mute and speak with our guest speakers, please let me know. Okay, Vanessa, you do. Let me go ahead and give you the right to hop off of mute. I love this. Let me just find you here in my lineup. Just scroll down. There you are. All right, so I'm going to ask you to unmute, and you can go ahead and ask your question or your reflection.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Cool. So my question is, I work for a company that used to have, solid metrics related to numbers. And so quantitative metrics. And now they are doing the shift to qualitative metrics. And they want to provide, all they want now is to provide a magical experience to customers. But employees, on the other hand, are not aware and are not very clear about what they must do to make this shift. So me as a manager, I am in the middle of this, trying to, help my leaders and, of course, helping my people. So what would be your advice for that? How could I help my employees to understand how they can better shift from being only focused on numbers and now being focused on, providing this magical experience to customers?
Well, I'll start out with it is a transition, right? If you and the call center environment that Maureen described is a great example of that. I'm so jealous you have a cat. I would love to have a cat. My husband's allergic. Sorry, very cat distracted. When you used to be measured by how many customers you closed, how fast you got people off the phone, all these things, it can be very jarring to suddenly be like, no, just be good and fix this customer's problems. It's like, whoa, like I had my old thing down pat. So how does this transition work? I think one of the ways to think about it is, are you spending enough time as a team talking about that transition and what it implies really for your team every day? So does that mean they get to spend more time doing X, or they don't have to pay as attention to Y, but like being as tangible as possible as to what that transition actually means, and then why it's good. What is it about that transition that actually should empower them, should give them that freedom and a framework that Maureen was describing earlier? Any change is hard, and there's a whole, ton of research on the, how everyone gets very excited, and then they're like, oh my God, the valley of despair. And then it's like, so they might be like, oh my God, thank God we are no longer measured by all those annoying metrics. But then like, okay, but now what? Like, how do I know I'm doing a good job? How do I know I'm doing the right thing? And so how do you as a leader help them through that, as you're just describing and using examples of ways that this new way of measuring impact on the business is benefiting them?
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think, wow, I love the idea of it's magic for customers. I do think you have to get, and if you can play a role in, what does that mean? And getting people really clear on what that looks like. And maybe it's not metrics, but maybe it is things like, we solve their problem. And I'm not, it's hard to not go back to a little bit of tangible, but like we solve their problem on the first call. We say something that like they didn't expect. I think just having a few of those tangible things so that people can in their mind say, did I do that? Did I do that? Did I do that? Maybe they're not measured on it, but they have that, an idea of the things that have worked in the past, and creating experience sharing around that so that people understand, okay, if this is what we think magic means, these are the things that make it so for customers, and this is how I can personally do more of that.
I love those responses. And also earlier you all spoke about the power of storytelling and story sharing. So I feel like that could be something also to add to the mix, right? So you see the written word of someone's, even if they, you didn't solve their problem in 5 minutes on the phone, they could provide some sort of feedback to show that they are still getting value through their story. And I think that just leans more into like the soft skills, power skills. And we usually focus on like employees, skill set there. But maybe now, since we are making this shift, and since specifically, Vanessa, you all are looking into that shift, it's interesting to gather information on those essential skills, those soft skills from the customer's perspective. It's really interesting times, as both of you have said throughout this conversation. Things are shifting, things are changing. I think it's asking us to just be give that space to walk through the transition together. So I love that you all are asking Vanessa, is there time dedicated within the team to just put it, up front, like, we're going through this transition. How is it going with you? How are you feeling? Just to not have it be the elephant in the room that continues to make it awkward or just annoying. Thank you both so much. Thank you, Vanessa, for hopping off of mute. Looks like we got your question answered there. We've got about 3 minutes left. So I would just love for both of you to leave us with some food for thought. You all have shared a lot of knowledge in the past hour. Thank you so much for your time, but leave us with some food for thought and then remind us how we can connect with the both of you when we finish this conversation.
I guess I can start. Going on this journey with the book has been, amazing. And I firmly believe in all of the things we say in the book about how to be a good leader, how to do the right by employees. I find myself in the day-to-day, though, crunch of managing lots of priorities, sometimes not reflecting all of those behaviors. And so it goes for myself, it goes back to start with yourself, right? And I have to constantly bring myself back to how am I showing up and how am I embodying those behaviors and calling myself out when I don't, because it is a stressful time and it's easy to get caught up in it. And so I feel like, to be that kind of positive change, we've got to start, here and those closest to us. So that would just be my advice, because it's one that I've found to be my own personal struggle.
Yeah, and the thing I will add to that is, I just am continually reminded about how important the human connections are. And the most energy I get is from working with amazing people and helping them be successful, whether those are my clients or my peers or people on my team. And when I go back to that, empowering others and engaging others, it's just so fulfilling for me. And so, how do you just always be giving, paying it forward, whatever term you want to, describe it, is for me the best way I spend my time. So I always look at my calendar and I say, where did I give something to somebody this week? And how do I make sure I continue to do that? As long as I'm leading this business, I want to be known for that. That's what and a lot of the things in our book talk about legacy. What are you doing for others, and what are you leaving behind, and how do people see the impact you can have on the world? And there's a lot in the book that has got lessons about being a great leader in that way.
So beautiful. I'm personally going to rewatch this because I wasn't able to take notes as vigorously as I would have liked because I had to moderate simultaneously. But I just want to remind folks how they can connect with you. Can you just verbally shout that out, and just also the name of the book that you want to promote as well, so that we can pick that up?
Yeah, so it's Maureen Burns on LinkedIn. I put my LinkedIn in the chat, and it's Winning on Purpose is the book. And Darcy put in the chat, the link to follow our newsletter, as well as her own LinkedIn. Darcy, I'll let you shout out as well.
Yeah, and my own LinkedIn. And then I'll add one more thing just so it's on there, is the netpromotersystem.com. There's a great, I'll call it the Cosmo quiz. If you grew up in the 80s like me and you read Cosmopolitan magazine, you used to take those silly quizzes. I think now they're on TikTok or some other platform in which my kids use and I do not. But there's a great quiz on there that gives you a sense for like, what does it take to be a great, loving company? And so it might be interesting for you or some of your peers to take it and reflect on that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll be sure to add these resources, the links to resources that you all are mentioning in the rewatch email. So be looking out for that. If you signed up for this chat, you'll get a rewatch email with the link to this video, as well as links to resources that our guest speakers have brought up throughout the conversation. Thank you so much for both of your, beautiful insight. I love just, the integrity behind what you all are sharing. I love the optimism also in just, the state of humanity. So thank you for sharing that with us today. And thank you everyone who's joined us live. For those of you who are rewatching, thank you as well. And we'll see you on the next chat. Take care.
Thank you all so much.